In today's video, we'll talk about Christ's commandment, love your enemies. Okay, one day at church, a priest delivers a sermon about the importance of forgiving your enemies. When he's a third of the way through the sermon, he says, "Raise your hand if you're now willing to forgive your enemies." Only about half the people in the church raise their hands, so the priest continues the sermon. When he's 2/3 of the way through the sermon, he says, "Raise your hand if you are now willing to forgive your enemies." This time, 3/4 of the people in the church raise their hands. So the priest continues the sermon. When he's completely finished the sermon, he says, "Raise your hand if you're now willing to forgive your enemies." And all the people in the church raise their hands except for one little old lady. Now the priest goes to the old lady and asks, "Why are you still unwilling to forgive your enemies?" "Simple," the old lady replies. "I have no enemies." "How old are you?" the priest asks. 96, she answers. "And you have no enemies?" "None at all." The priest is amazed. "Come up to the front with me." So the priest and the old lady go up to the front of the church, and the priest says, "Please explain to my entire congregation how it is that you have no enemies." "Simple," says the old lady. "I outlive them all." Okay, be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you won't miss any future videos. Now in Matthew 5:43-45, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." Now when Jesus said, "you have," as in you have heard, he was talking about the human standard. In Matthew 5:43-45, Jesus points out that the human standard, hate your enemy, had been added to the written law, which was love your neighbor. Then Jesus changes things. "What I say to you is God's standard, and God's standard is to love your enemy also." For we humans, loving our neighbor, whether lovable or not, is often hard enough, but loving our enemy, how do we do that? It requires self-denial. Jesus is talking about agape love, which is a selfless love that thinks of others before it thinks of self. Now, this type of love needs divine help. But wait a minute, didn't Jesus call the Pharisees hypocrites, snakes, offspring of vipers and fools in Matthew 23:13-36? That does not seem to be showing love to his enemies. Well, Jesus was only calling them out because they were wrong in their actions and behavior. Jesus did them no harm. By loving your enemies, Jesus meant that we should not take revenge on them or harm them. Instead, we should show kindness to them and pray for them, for they do not know what they are doing. Now, while we're under our old nature, we tend to strike back at people who do things against us. But when we become new people in Christ, we begin to see our enemies as people whom Christ loves and for whom he died on the cross, just as he died for us. We are all sinners saved by God's grace. Thus, to love our enemy is to obey God's law with respect to them. So we do not steal from, murder, commit adultery with, or lie about our enemies. We should not call them names, make disparaging social media posts, make fun of, or slander, or misrepresent what our enemy says. So St. Paul is clear about the nature of love in Romans 13:10, stating that love is the fulfillment of the law. Now in my next video, we will discuss Christ's commandment, give to please God, not to be seen. God bless you, and have a great day.